Okay, so welcome back to Portland. I know you were just recently out in New York City.
Thank you. I
Let's
was.
talk about how uh, crypto and Bitcoin in particular is perceived by
Mhm.
CEOs and upper management. Like, what is the current? You just had a chance to connect with some CEOs and upper management people about sort of crypto and this crypto space. So
Yeah.
you got a little bit of the pulse, or at least of some people. What did you learn from that experience as far as, where are we at in the cycle, awareness cycle amongst people like that?
Yeah. So just to give a context here, I just gave a presentation on Web3 to, which is, involves crypto, of course, to a group of 19. And that was mostly CEOs, probably 16 or 17 of them were CEOs, something like that. And like reasonable CEOs, they're like, their companies are probably all between worth, $2 and $70 million or something like that. Anyway, so where are they? I would say most they sort of fall into one of two groups, which is probably true for the general public as well, which is either they have a pretty good understanding of the stuff that's going on and have lots of opinions and lots of questions and lots of things to say, or they sort of just view this stuff as like a stock still. Don't see it as anything else that's really going on. Don't really understand the idea of decentralization in any kind of real way. I had many CEOs tell me repeatedly that even in a smart contract, there's a person behind that. And I was saying there isn't actually, it's just code. There's no one behind it. Once a smart contract is created, it's an independent thing. But they really struggle to understand that concept and came back with me repeatedly, not combatively, but repeatedly, really just saying, but there has to be someone who's profiting, right? Who's profiting on this. And I said, well, the treasury is profiting, the DAO can be profiting, the decentralized autonomous organization. But that doesn't have to involve a person. There can be no people involved still, who are actively profiting. They're like, but why would anyone create this? And I was saying, well, the creators own the token, own a bunch of the token, which is used to decide where the money goes from the DAO. And also they get some piece of the profits, much like a share of stock in that way. But they really thought that they really struggle to see it differently than the way we almost view brick and mortar ownership of stores right now. So, I mean, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them. And so we spent more time on that than I thought we were going to. I thought I was going to walk in, they were going to understand that stuff and sort of laugh at me for even explaining it to them. And instead, it went the other way, which was really surprising to me.
And I know this is a small-ish group, but
Yes.
of the group,
And
was it the majority who didn't really have a lot of familiarity with Web3 or what?
they had familiarity the way I would say a well-read and put together person has familiarity with it right now, which is they know a few of the talking points. They've seen people talk about it on MSNBC or CNBC or wherever. They've heard some of the things Elizabeth Warren has to say, but they haven't really investigated it for themselves. I will say this. The group I was talking to was the majority of them, the vast majority were over 50 years old. I would say they were mostly probably between 45 and 60, almost all of them. There were probably two people under that age. So I think that probably plays into it a little bit too, because like younger people more intrinsically get the idea of digital assets because they've had them, they've owned them in ways that some of the older people maybe haven't had as much. Younger people grew up sort of already, their music was always digital. They never touched it. They never held it, game assets when they were video gaming as slightly younger people. Those are things that they never touched or held either. And they owned, even though they were on some other system. Um, this is just something that is a newer concept. And not to me, I've been around for a while, and I would guess not to you anymore, Sean, but if you're right at the beginning of this stuff and you just heard Elizabeth Warren say, bad, 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 or whatever you've heard, what does Charlie Munger have to say about this? Which certainly I got that question as well. Um, that's the kind of stuff we were talking about more than I expected us to. I thought we were going to be talking about, why are these things investable and what's the best investable place for your money and how can you make a lot of money on this? What's the real opportunity for big business people in Web3 is what I thought we were going to talk about. And we really didn't.
And what would your answer have been to that?
For business stuff,
Yeah.
I have two. Well, I think it's two prongs. So one is what's investable, and the other one is what kind of company would you want to make, right? So investable, I think, is pretty straightforward. My answer is essentially, if you want to keep it traditional, I think something like Meta, which is ex Facebook, knee Facebook, is an interesting place to go. They're really bet big on the metaverse. Right now they're down, which might be a great time to get in. They're throwing all their resources at it. So if it ends up hitting, which I think it still probably has a pretty good chance of hitting, they're likely to be right in the center of it. I think that's an interesting play. I was going to say some other things, which I could say, but who cares? Because then I was going to lead into, but really, I don't invest in any of those things because I believe mostly in the networks. I'm a picks and shovels kind of guy. I think the rails that the trains ride on is where to make all the money because it's kind of a guarantee. It's a big win. So to me, the networks themselves, so Bitcoin and Ethereum is sort of where I come back to. Ethereum gets a little piece of every transaction on Ethereum because you have to spend Ethereum to send anything on the Ethereum network or to do anything on the Ethereum network. You have to spend a little bit. So if you're an Ethereum stakeholder, which just means you own Ethereum, you get a little piece of that. Every time someone spends a little bit of money, you get a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of it to you if you're an Ethereum staker. So I believe that's going to raise the value of these networks tremendously. So the only real question is which networks are going to win, in my mind. So I believe Ethereum is so far ahead in the smart contract game these days. Things are being built, their side chains and layer 2 solutions for Ethereum. There are some competitors. It's possible they don't win, but they're so far ahead. They have an incredible chance to win. They have by far the most things being built on it. That's pretty good. And then Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network also way ahead of everyone else, certainly if we're talking about store of value. Not that they actually have acted like a store of value so far, Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean the narrative is strong enough. And that network is clearly, it's got the network effect. Let me say it that way. Like people believe in it. Clearly look at the market cap, look at the price, right?
All right. So
that's my basic answer for investable. Yeah.
What percentage of these CEOs approximately were skeptics and what percentage were enthusiasts?
I would say most of them were neither. They were more sort of coming to it like, here's the thing I don't really know a whole lot about, and then struggle to understand the fundamentals of Web3 as I explained it to them. Now, hopefully by the end, they did get it, but I thought they just would already know it. Beyond that, I would say there was only like one really clear skeptic who's a super nice guy. And I really enjoyed talking to him, actually. There were a few enthusiastic people, but almost everyone else was just asking more basic questions or sort of more fun questions. Like, Sam Bankman-Fried, what's going to happen to him? And it's like, probably he'll go to jail for a long time. Next, stuff like that. We're talking more basic, fun stuff as opposed to why sovereignty of money is so important and why it's going to, why everyone should effectively be very interested in that. And I tried to explain that to them. And I think they got it by the end. I hope they did. But I thought they would already know that. That's all. And so I don't think they even had very strong opinions about it. It's more like, well, what is this Web3 anyway? Kind of a thing. That surprised me.
So was there anything else that came out of that presentation or that meeting that you felt like was useful learning?
No, not for me. I learned that I need to be to give these guys more background and context and simplify than the people I was talking to who was setting this up knew a little more about it and assured me everyone was like as put together as they were. And that didn't seem to be the case. That's fine. But I think I need to know that. I think they assumed that too. I don't think I was lied to. I think they just thought, oh, everyone knows what a smart contract is what I was told. But it seemed very clear. Very few people really understood. They maybe know it, like they've heard of it, but that's different than understanding it. And so that's the piece that I thought I could just talk quickly about a smart contract and move on. Talk quickly about sovereignty and, you actually own the things you own kind of a thing and move on. And actually I needed to spend more time with that as what is my learnings anyway.
Yeah. So just along those lines, what's an example of a smart contract that you've engaged in? Simple smart contract that you've engaged in?
Well, the simplest for me anyway is decentralized marketplaces. So if I want to go and buy any digital asset. So usually this might be like buying Ethereum even is a great example. So I go to a decentralized marketplace like Uniswap. There's one called PancakeSwap. There's a million of them. 1inch is another popular one. That's actually an aggregator, but whatever. But Uniswap's the most popular one. So you go to Uniswap, which is really just like going to a website. Got a really clean interface. You hook up your proxy wallet called MetaMask to it just by connecting it. So it knows it's connected to you now, your little local self. And then you buy whatever you want. You basically put up what you have. You say, hey, I've got $10,000 here and I want to buy that much Ethereum. and it says, well, here's how much Ethereum you'll get for that. And you press a button and you confirm it and you send it from your custodied wallet. You send your $10,000 out. That goes into a smart contract. And it all happens very quickly, but behind the scenes, it takes that $10,000, it trades it for Ethereum directly, or if they don't have a pool for that, it trades it for something else, maybe several steps of trades until it gets back about $10,000 worth of Ethereum, whatever it's promised me, and then gives that to me. And this all happens. It's not that it happens in an instant, it happens quickly, but my $10,000 is not released fully from my custody until they're giving me my $10,000 worth of Ethereum. Hence, there's a safety there. Like they can't just abscond with my $10,000, even though I hit, swap. The swap only happens when everything happens. Everything executes at the same time.
So it sounds like, to the uninitiated, almost like a brokerage, like a Charles Schwab, where I want to buy $5,000 worth of Coca-Cola stock. I send them $5,000. They give me the $5,000 worth of Coca-Cola stock, and some code, I assume, is behind that. I don't know if I doubt there's an individual person who's, doing all of those transactions. So those would be like smart contracts in some way too, no?
Not at all. From the outside, they look similar. The difference is when I do that with Charles Schwab or you do that with Charles Schwab, what actually there are people behind it is the problem. So there's some level of automation, but it goes through several steps. First of all, it goes to market makers, which is not Charles Schwab. Then it goes to transfer agents, which is not market makers or Charles Schwab. Then it goes to the people actually down on the floor who actually make the trade, at the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or whatever it is. It's 3 levels of transfer there. And then they actually make the trade and it comes back up and everyone's taking a piece along the way and you're trusting them to give you back your assets, right? The thing about a smart contract is there's no trust needed. When you send when you have your $10,000 in your Schwab account, you're trusting them to actually give it to you when you ask. That's the difference. And that's the difference between really Web 2 and Web 3 is I don't need to trust Charles Schwab anymore. And I can still make trades. I can still do things with this money. In fact, faster and cheaper.
That sounds great. It sounds excellent. Sounds like something that Charles Schwab and the Charles Schwabs of the world would want to emulate. Wouldn't they want to copy that?
Well, I think what they would really want to do is kill it, but that's probably not going to work out for them. So yeah, they're probably going to have to do some form of emulation, but they're also going to, there's always going to be an audience and a demographic that wants the quote personal touch or doesn't feel comfortable engaging in these things, even as the graphic user interfaces get easier and easier to use. Like they're not that easy yet to use. You need to be pretty much an expert to use any of this stuff right now. But that's not going to continue to be the case. Like think about the difference between trying to find, look, just today, I asked, ChatGPT, the very popular intelligence engine these days. I said, hey, here's the recipe I'm going to make. How many calories is in it? And it just told me right away, it's this many calories. Each thing is this many and the total is this many. And that's assuming this and this and this. And I can just say, well, what about this? And I also said to it, by the way, hey, cast a Fantastic Four movie for me for Marvel. And while you're doing it, tell me why you're casting the people that way. And then tell me who you didn't cast, but almost got the role and why they didn't get it. And it's like, okay. And boom, it's like right there. So there's an ease of use right now with ChatGPT. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And it, by the way, it does way more interesting things than that. That's very basic stuff for it. But at this point, I can now talk to it. I mean, you can actually even set up a thing where you speak as opposed to type, but you talk to it like it's a person almost. And it responds like you're a person almost, right? As opposed to what we had 15, 20 years ago with Alta Vista and Yahoo, where search started to get a little easier, but it was hard. And then Google came around and search was better. And now this isn't even search. This is a little way more complicated than search, but it also includes search. You can say to it, by the way, and I do this, summarize this YouTube video for me. And it'll watch it instantly and immediately summarize it for me. And I don't have to spend 10 minutes watching it. It'll be right there on a page and I can just look at it. It does stuff like that. So that's what's going to happen for crypto use too. Like it's going to get easy to the point where it doesn't feel like work anymore. It doesn't feel complicated anymore. We're not all the way there, even with ChatGPT, quite frankly, but we are way, way along. And at this point, at the speed everything's going, I would guess a year from now, most people are going to be using it a lot in their lives, is my guess. People who use Google right now for search, they will still use it a little bit for search because it's not really a search engine, but it has access to many, many things, everything and its own brain as well. And it's a special new thing. I think crypto is going to have a moment like that too, an iPod, MP3 to iPod moment where everyone's like, oh, I know how to use that. That makes sense to me. Instead of if you remember the MP3 players before the iPod, they didn't really work well. They were clunky. They didn't keep many songs, and no one really even knew how to use them very well. I used to have one. It was hard. I could use it, but I was pretty tech oriented, and it was still not easy. Most people didn't have one, and when they did, they mostly didn't use it. When people got an iPod, they immediately understood how it worked, and everyone used it, and everyone bought them, and here we are.
Yeah, it's true. Both of those analogies, like ChatGPT, is not only dramatically, such an evolution from Alta Vista. It's such an evolution from what was available 4 months ago. I mean, the fact that you just say, summarize this YouTube video, and it can spit out like really good quality summary instantly is phenomenal. And that's just one little thing that it does. And you're absolutely right. Why I think is the adoption process is going to be huge. It's going to be dramatic, the increases. And why would you use Google to look up how many calories are in a recipe if you have to then navigate between the top 5 choices and, this site, it's super clunky, this site, let me go back and find another site, when you can just ask ChatGPT? It's already like phenomenally useful for just anybody who likes to search the web and, likes information or, has found and discovered how to use it practically, like for recipes and stuff like that.
I mean, it goes way beyond that, to be clear, like way, way, way beyond its practical uses even right now. But for example, even with recipes, I said, hey, here's some ingredients that I have. Come up with a few recipes using some or all of those ingredients. It came up with 4 or 5. I said, cool. How many calories are in that one? It told me. I was like, cool. I think I also said, now give me the full recipe for this one. Like everything I need to do exactly. It did. These are all, it takes 10 seconds to get this stuff. And I could say, no, do it this way instead. And it says, oh, okay. I had it. I know we're sort of moved on to GPT at this point, but it is really exciting stuff. I had it writing the first chapter of a time travel detective story of some sort. Who can remember? And I had it do it in the style of Stephen King, and then I had it do it in the style of Dave Barry, the humorist from Florida. He's written some books and is well known. And the Dave Barry one was pretty funny. And I said, make it 50. That's good, but make it 50% funnier. And it wrote the same thing and made it 50% funnier. Like every joke had a bit more of a joke to it. And I was like, this is unbelievable that it understood that, but it did. It totally got what I meant and really tried. And it wasn't always laugh out loud funny, but it was pretty good, actually. It was sort of shockingly good. So it's very exciting technology.
And like, there's an app out there that is, there's several of them, but there's sort of an app that's the most popular app for putting your ingredients in. And it will find you a recipe that it can, someone put a lot of time and energy into creating that. And it's just been basically like cannibalized by, that may not be the right term, cannibalized, but it's basically like that is a business model. Is just, why would you get the app and pay for it if you can just ask ChatGPT, which also, then sort of calls into question Google. And I mean, who would have thought that the mighty Google was vulnerable to something that could really cut into their ad dollars? They've invested as well in their own sort of AI. So hopefully, but even if ChatGPT takes a huge chunk and Google's no longer 80-90% of the search game, how does that affect their bottom line revenues? And if you invested in Google, wow, is it the long-term value play that you thought? The answer might be shockingly, because this is so quickly that this ChatGPT has come along and is a game changer. And most people don't even know it yet, but it is one of those things where you use it a few times and instantly you're like, oh, this is something I want to keep using,
Sean, I mean, I think, yes, the person who did the recipe calorie calculator thing is in trouble or whatever. That kind of stuff is going to be put out to pasture. But copywriters, business plan people, lawyers, it's anything creative, anything technical, it can do pretty well right now, let alone what it's going to be able to do 6 months from now or a year. You can tell it. You can never have coded before. So I've been learning coding over the last year or so. And I recently decided to stop learning it. And one of the reasons why is because ChatGPT, you can just tell it you want to do something and it'll just give you the code. You don't have to know how to do it. And there are now lots of apps and games being no coded, as it's called, because people literally have never learned code and never written a line of code in their life. And they're able to make apps anyway, because they just have to describe it well enough to ChatGPT and it will give you the code. And then you can tweak it from there by telling it how you want it tweaked. And it'll say, well, try it this way, try it this way. It is changing the game in so many ways. I don't know what's going to happen. It's almost impossible to see what things are going to look like as recently, as soon as 5 years from now, I think, because it could eat so many jobs. And so we're going to have to really evolve into new things that we're good at, because it's so much better than we are and so much faster than we are at almost everything that we right now make money doing. I mean, I don't know what's going to be left. It already is more creative than any human, for sure. I've done lots of things with it. It blows me away with its creativity. It's not great yet at dialogue. It's not great yet at necessarily straying outside the bounds of more familiar story beats and things like that. But it understands story beats. It understands dialogue. And, it's only going to get better and better. I really struggle to even picture what the world's going to look like soon. But what it does say to me is, man, I'm bringing it back to crypto now, having assets that are sort of outside of some of these other fiat-based games that everyone's playing, I think it's an even better time to do that, because the world's changing really fast right now. And these decentralized networks that everything's going to run on is still going to be the case, even with ChatGPT. It's not going to replace that. I don't think. I don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a year from now, I'll be singing a different tune on that too. But that's something I feel like I think the Ethereum network is still going to thrive. Even ChatGPT may be doing everyone's decentralized finance for them, but it'll be doing it on the Ethereum network almost certainly. And so it's still a good thing.
As a sort of common man, I'll take that title. And as the skeptic, it's sort of like ChatGPT is something that has come along. I've had some exposure to, not even a ton of exposure to, but enough exposure to think to myself, this is revolutionary. I'm experiencing it, and then with crypto, I feel like it's had this promise of being revolutionary for the last 10, certainly the last 5 years, where it's like, it's going to change things, there's going to be these networks and, here's all the advantages of it. As far as, how quickly you can send payments and how, there's the potential for all the no fees and all minimal fees and all of the ways that you can do micropayments to people anywhere, anyhow, and that you don't need institutions. And it's like that promise has been here. And I feel like for me, it's not like when I asked you for a smart contract, the example you gave was buying Ethereum. And it's like, cool in a way. It's theoretically, it's like nice.
You asked for a simple smart contract.
Exactly.
Give me a simple one, so I did.
Exactly. No, I'm not putting down the example, but I'm saying like, where's the life changing? You said to me, if people really understood where this was going, so many people would be like diving headfirst into owning Ethereum, owning Bitcoin. The only thing that I still believe in as a potential is this story of enough people buy into the story of Bitcoin being a store of value, that the Bitcoin itself seems like the code is written well enough and it's secure enough, and that whole 22 million Bitcoins and that's it, that all of 21. That together, 21, all of that together is like, that's the story works well enough with the technology that enough people believe, and it seems like more and more people are buying into that story, even in the downturns. So
let me just pump the brakes a little bit on this insane thing you're saying. Okay, AI. They did not just start working on AI 6 months ago. You just became aware of it 6 months ago. They've been working on AI for decades and decades, right? You're finally seeing it. You're asking crypto, you're putting crypto up against an unfair timeline where you're like, well, ChatGPT has been incredible in the last 4 months. They've been working on it for decades. Crypto came out of nowhere by one dude 14 years ago, and it's got a $1 trillion market cap anyway. Like, give me a break. Also, so come on, man. But also, we're like, you asked for a simple example. I gave you one, and then you're saying, well, where's the life-changing stuff? I could give you life-changing examples if you want. You didn't ask for it. I could say, for example, that when we do blockchain voting, we will no longer be able to have people credibly is an interesting word, but credibly say this was fraudulent, because we will always be able to know and verify that every person who voted was from the pool of correct voters, and every single voter will be able to go and check and verify that their vote was counted correctly. So there was a thing that happened in the United States about a year ago, or a few years ago now, January 6th, where people died because they stormed the Capitol looking to do, well, I don't know exactly what, but bad things is what I would call it. Potentially looking to slaughter the House of the Senate. I don't know. It's unclear. Take over the government. It's unclear. Some version of that. It's because they believed that the vote was fraudulent. If they knew it, now maybe they would be not believing anyway. I understand that there's always going to be folks who don't believe, but the difference is you can prove it now. Like with blockchain, you can actually prove it. Now, they may decide they don't care what the evidence is. Well, then there's nothing to be done about that, except, I don't know. Let's not get into that piece of it. But that's different than we're forced to trust the people who tell us that what the votes are, which is where we are right now, right? And so you can see why that's problematic, as what nowadays in the United States, and I'm sure in many other places too, this happened in Brazil, when certain folks lose, they just say it was fraudulent. And then all their people believe them. And it's a thing every single time. So if we could have a system where some of those people are going to believe them anyway, but a lot of people in the middle who are like, well, I don't know if it's fraudulent or not. We'll be able to say, well, I know it's not fraudulent. I'm not forced to trust the government anymore about who won or who lost. Like, that kind of stuff is that's life-changing, man.
If you think that smart contracts are going to make that happen, then I've got some FTX coin that I'd like to sell you. Because I don't think it's going to work. I think you could have all the evidence in the world. You could lay it out there and show the code, and there'll be people who will be, and that those group of people are a huge group of a huge sizable minority in the population now who are going to say, I don't believe it. You could show them the evidence right in front of their face, and they would not believe it. So, and
there's always going to be people like that.
Yeah,
but that's different than saying, but all of the people who don't believe it now, some of them will believe it if you show them actual evidence. The evidence that they see right now is the New York Times says so. That's it, right? As opposed to, come and look at the blockchain. Some of them will believe in that, especially as we get further in the blockchain becomes more a part of their lives. They will also be able to see. Yeah.
It seems a long shot. That I'm going to there's 370 million people in the US. I don't know how many voters there are. Let's say 100 million voters, 125 million. Sure. So there's going to be all of this code to indicate each individual and how they voted. And that what you're going to look through all that, and it's going to tell you, oh, this was a legitimate election. Or you're going to have a computer scan through that, or ChatGPT look through that and give you an answer and tell you. And then once again, there's going to be the same people now who doubt, elections because it's someone else has told them to, or because they're conspiracy minded. They're going to do the same thing.
I mean, look, you can't account for crazy, but you're saying you don't want a system where you can verify things? You prefer a system where you're forced to trust big institutions who have reason to lie? I don't know why you'd want that. Why would you want to give the government and big institutions more power rather than less power? Isn't that like, even if you take it out of this example of blockchain voting, in general, in the world, wouldn't it be better for them to have less power instead of where we're forced to trust them for everything? You can look on either side of the aisle for this too. I know I was hitting the right side of American politics a little bit there, but I could hit the left side just as easily. When COVID happened, the CDC came out and said, you don't need masks. And they were lying, and they knew they were lying, but they wanted to make sure there were enough masks for doctors. That's fucking crazy, right? But we're forced to trust these institutions. And in fact, the trust has been deeply, deeply eroded. And it's one of the problems, one of the many problems, but one of the problems in America and throughout the world. So why wouldn't you want something that helps to build trust back? I don't understand. How is that not life-changing? Of course it's life-changing.
Let's just stick with the example of the voting, and then I'll talk about the masks.
Okay.
So,
okay.
If you said to me, "Hey, we could do this with smart contracts, and there'll be this record of it, whatever," if you make a sound technological case for it, which I'm not a computer coder, I'm not a technology specialist, so I'm going to have to trust someone else who tells me, "Oh, this is really legit code. This is really legit smart contracts, and it's unbreakable." And I'm going to have to either decide to trust that expert's opinion or not. And then once that happens, I'm probably in that population of people where then when the election shows a certain result, I'm going to believe it. But I already believe what's happened now. So I'm still in the believe it group with the different with the government and the different organizations that have gone and done these, like, go look at the votes in different states. Okay. They've come back and basically they have fraud, and I kind of believe them. So I'm in the believe them group.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's not not revolutionary, is what I'm saying.
Let me ask you a question.
Human nature. You're not dealing with.
I understand that.
Yeah,
I understand that. Okay, fair enough. You do make some fair points there. In 2000, Al Gore and George Bush were in as close an election as you could have. And when they recounted the votes in Florida, finally, well after the election was over and after George Bush was president, the Miami Herald, I think, actually did. It took them like a year, but they did a full recount of Florida. Al Gore actually won Florida, according to them. Now, didn't matter anymore. George Bush was president. No one was disputing that. It was over, right? If we had blockchain voting, Al Gore would have been president. Just period. We wouldn't have there'd be nothing to miscount, right? So I would argue to you that if Al Gore was president in 2000 and thus was president during 9/11, and George Bush then was not going to be president almost ever in 2004, there's a few ways that happens, but almost never is he president. Like, everything changes in the United States is a completely different country. Obama's probably not president in 2008. Like, all these things differently happen.
Yeah, that's a good example.
We probably wouldn't have, MAGA anymore. I don't think. I don't know what we would have. I don't know if it would be better or worse, to be clear, but it would be life. I would guess not. And when America would be that different and that affected, the rest of the world would be too, almost certainly. So I would say something just as basic as that. You don't even need people to believe or not. Just to be able to count it correctly would be pretty good. You can't even do that right.
I agree.
So that would be life-changing. There's an example. You son of a bitch.
Okay, let's take it out of the voting world. So let's take it out of the voting world. Do guys like you, who are crypto enthusiasts, who are Web3 enthusiasts, decentralization, smart contract enthusiasts, do you see other avenues? Like, do you have a half a dozen avenues where you're like, here's where it's going to change society? Or is it just that the concept is really exciting to you because you believe that the concept can be changed in such a way that's unknown to you, but that's going to change all of our lives?
I think it's mostly that for most people. So this isn't true. There's some people where it affects them right now, the way that the Web3 crypto stuff matters right now to them. But mostly it doesn't matter to people like you or even people like me, right? I mean, it affects me because I'm heavily invested in it, of course. But the thing is, it doesn't matter until it really matters. Like, everything's like, I'm Jewish, so I feel comfortable saying this. Like, you could be a Jew in Germany for a really long time and it was just fine. And then really it wasn't, and it just wasn't anymore. And it would have been really great to be prepared for that in some way. Like, things can change kind of fast. Cyprus 2013, they had to bail out the banks and they just effectively stole money from all their citizens. They froze everyone's bank account, and anyone who had more than 100,000 euro in their bank account, they took 47.5% of everything this is at least from the depositors in the biggest bank in Cyprus. Literally took millions of euros from these people. All they repaid them with was bank stock, which had no value essentially because the banks needed to be bailed out in the first place. They just stole their money. So 3 months before that, you could be like, what do we need something like this for? Who cares? We can trust the banks. Everything's fine. The government's great. And then the moment they screw you, you suddenly see the value of it. It almost reminds me of back in the day when we had our personal computers and everyone was like, you should back up your computer. And no one really did. I certainly didn't. the reason why you back up your computer, at least back in the day, was once you lost everything once. And then you learn you have to back up your computer, right? Because you lost and you feel the pain of it and you realize that it's worth a little bit of trouble. And boy, that system's important. And it may have cost you a huge amount, even, right? Speaking of life-changing, people who had money in Gemini earn, for example, I would say their lives are very much changed because they were keeping their money custodied with someone else instead of self-custodying it. You made fun of FTX. FTX is exactly the reason why Web3 is important, because they held customer funds instead of the customers having custody of it. And so $12 billion disappeared. If the customers themselves use decentralized marketplaces instead of FTX, that money can't be taken. That money is safe. Many people who were rich and are now poor would still be rich. For real. So I think they would all argue that would be life-changing. Gotcha.
No, well, I mean, yes, I think they would certainly agree with you. I guess what immediately comes to mind is like, there's a world that we live in where if you have less than $250,000 in an account, you have it insured by the federal government. And if the world changes to such an extent that that money is not insured by the federal government and you have lost that money, then the shit has really hit the fan. And I don't know, maybe having a crypto backup would help you. Maybe if you had 100 grand or 50 grand in crypto that you could keep away from the government, you'd be in a much better position. But I think, like, what percentage of people prepare for something like that? That feels almost like that part of it feels like almost like preppers who are, building the concrete bunker because the apocalypse is on the way.
What percentage of, not what percentage, how much money do you think are in US banks right now that's uninsured?
I'm going to say more than $10.
That is correct. I think I saw this number yesterday. I saw it yesterday, so I may be low on this. It's at least $11 trillion. It might be 24, but it's at least 11 trillion. Yeah. It's like an insane, because what happens is these companies, they can't break their bank accounts into 250K things. They're moving big amounts of money constantly in and out. They can have one account to do it in. They can't deal. It's a logistical nightmare to have multiple accounts. And to just protect $250,000 at a time isn't really worth it to them anyway. Right. So now we're down to either those companies are in jeopardy, and those people, by the way, it doesn't have to be companies, can be individuals as well, are in jeopardy in the event of bank failures. And believe it or not, we've had a bunch of bank failures recently, and there's no reason to think we're not going to have more in the somewhat near future if interest rates don't come down, right? Because the same problems that plagued Silicon Valley Bank, which was they had hold to maturity bonds, which are 10-year bonds, and the value of those dropped to essentially a negative value. Other banks have the same problems, right? Maybe not to the same degree, but given enough time, that's going to be a problem for them too. So either the depositors there get screwed badly, or inflation goes crazy. Those are your two options. You get to pick, right? They lower interest rates, inflation goes crazy. They keep interest rates high, then the more banks are going to fail. And I understand that the Fed's job is to try and do the dance between those two spots, but they haven't been doing a great job lately, or maybe no one can do a great job. Maybe it's not possible to do a great job. But either way, it seemed we just had runaway inflation. And as soon as we started to even kind of slow that down, now we're starting to have bank failures. Big bank failures, in fact. The second biggest bank failure of all time just happened. So you can call it doomsday preppers if you want, but I would say if I owned a big company that had a lot of assets, I'd be very concerned about that right now, unless I was sure the U.S. government was going to backstop it. And if I knew the U.S. government was going to backstop it, then I'd be very interested in buying things that were inflation hedges. And I believe ultimately Bitcoin and some of the bigger crypto like Ethereum are going to act as long-term inflation hedges, not short-term ones, but long-term ones. Other things do as well, certainly. Real estate. We could go on forever with this, right? Index funds, gold, potentially, maybe not, but maybe. I think there's a case to be made for crypto in either direction. Either inflation goes crazy and ultimately some of that value gets shuttled to crypto because it goes to hard assets, or inflation doesn't go crazy and we've got bank issues and there's really good reason to be on these sovereignty networks, these sovereign networks, rather than places where you trust them with your money. I think it's really hard to have an in between there.
It's fascinating because this landscape that we're living through right now is really good for the storyline of crypto. If you are worried about the banks, then you have this decentralized alternative where you can self-custody your money. And if you are worried about inflation, well, you have this supposed inflation hedge that wasn't acting like it prior to very recent, but at the moment seems to be acting that way. I guess a big concern maybe for a lot of people, including those institutions, would be I suppose the volatility of Bitcoin. So there's 9 trillion in assets that are uninsured. 40% apparently of all deposits in the bank, since you just said that. So 40% of all deposits in the bank uninsured. I mean, that is nuts. So the thing is, if you have a small business and you have $2 million, I mean, it'd be a bit of a worry putting it all in Bitcoin, given the volatility. You don't
have to put it in a crypto though. You could put it in stable coins. You could keep it in dollars on the blockchain, in USDC or Tether or something like that, right? It doesn't have to be in something that's going to move up and down. You can keep it as dollars.
Given the recent sort of Luna issue and the other stable coin that was supposed to be hasn't there 2 stable coins that have had issues?
There was a concern around USDC when Silicon Valley Bank went down.
Yeah.
Because they had $3.3 billion in SVB. So the value of USDC dropped to 93 cents. It's always right around $1, like within a half a cent of a dollar, always. Dropped to 93 cents. And then when the US government said they were backstopping it popped right back up. It was never going to drop much lower than 93 cents, except as a panic thing, because that was still only about 5% of their reserves of the backing of USDC. So it really shouldn't have ever dropped below 95 cents on the dollar anyway, even at the $3.3 billion.
That's incredible that there's that much USDC out there.
That's not even the biggest stablecoin. Tether's bigger. Yeah, this stuff is, it's, and like think of this. Let's say I get in real trouble. I don't know what kind. I need money fast. I need a lot of money fast, right? So I contact you and I say, Sean, buddy, we're good friends. I need $50,000. I kind of need it right now, like now. And you say, Jonathan, we're good friends. We have had a long history together. Of course, I trust you. I have $50,000. I want to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to get you out of this horrible situation you're in, right? You're like, but oh God, it's Saturday. So it's going to be a few days because my bank is closed. I can put it in the online request, but it's going to take a few days because people have to do it. So you're going to have to wait till Monday. And even then it's another day. So really Tuesday, probably. Hopefully there's no holiday, like Bank Day or something like that, or, it's Martin Luther King Day or whatever on Monday, because otherwise it's going to take another day, right? As opposed to if we're doing sovereign networks, you can say, okay, and then I would have it. Like, again, almost never is this going to matter, but when it does, it really does.
Fascinating. I mean, just a quick story. So I'm in Spain. Yeah. And, if you haven't been pickpocketed before, you might think, I would be sensitive to it and not be pickpocketed. Maybe that's true for you. But for me, I was on the phone. Someone who was friendly came up and approached me from one side and asked me a question. I turned towards them and answered their question. While that happened, somebody pickpocketed me from behind. And I was finishing up my phone call. My cognitive load is high because I'm talking on the phone. I'm talking to this person who's very friendly and nice, who then walks away. Then I reach for my wallet and I'm like, wallet's gone. And I was in a foreign country at the time with no money on my phone, and all my credit cards were gone. All my cash was gone. I had literally nothing. Went into a store, told the lady I just got robbed, and she offered me an ice cream. She's like, it's an ice cream. Want an ice cream? I'm like, no, I really don't. Went down to the police station, and it was just full of people who had just had the same variation of the same thing happen. It was like a tourist area, so it was like super common. I can't believe that they don't have more cops out there catching people. But bottom line, I did not even have a hotel. I was just sort of like traveling and backpacking. I had nothing,
Wow.
money for food, no money for a hotel. I'm like, I'm sleeping outside
Jeez.
tonight and I'm not eating. And I called my sister, who rushed to Western Union, got there 5 minutes before they closed, and sent me
Right.
enough money for me to get the money that day. And like the whole thing was just exactly what you're describing on a smaller level, so I actually had enough to like eat and stay
Yeah.
inside. Yeah, so that really
Wow.
happened. In that scenario,
Incredible.
um, I guess I wonder the same thing. If someone sends money digitally, like you still need to go to a bank to get cash, don't you? Like how would you, someone sends you digital money? How do you get access to actual money that you can spend when you're in the store?
It's actually really easy. Even now, there are tools where you can essentially have a credit card you can swipe, and you
Yeah.
can put your digital money onto that and
Okay.
swipe it. So you can sort of stay outside of the sort of banking system entirely if you want to. You know, staying on the theme of like Saved by the Bell or not, like you barely made it in time there. Just 5 minutes before Western Union closed and all. It's a great story for this. Silicon Valley Bank themselves, the day that they were failing, they applied for help to give them like a short cash infusion from the San Francisco something or other, whose job it is to do this, like save banks who can be saved.
Yeah.
They're there as to backstop this. And so they did it late in the day though.
Mm.
And the problem was that at 4 p.m., those computers shut down and are not available to work until the next day. And the next day was too late. And so they started the process too late and could not get the money in time. Had they been able to get the money that day, it's possible they wouldn't have failed.
Yeah.
But instead, they absolutely failed. By the next morning, I think they had failed because they needed the money that day and they couldn't get it because computers shut down at 4 o'clock because everyone goes home. Like,
Yeah.
so
Nuts.
again, life changing. And you didn't say this part, but like if you had to sleep outside in Spain and someone killed you, one could argue that would have been life changing too, right? The fact that but you got the money, so it all worked out, right?
Yeah.
Like you could have gotten beaten up. Who knows what's happened to you? You could be a vagrant right now.
Totally. And the other thing though is that I would have need to have had the crypto credit card in a different location to my wallet, because if the crypto credit card had gotten stolen, even if I called you and I was like, I need $1,000 immediately, you'd be like, sure, but then I couldn't
Well,
have the card.
That's true. But what really happens is you can go online and it'll give you like a number, which effectively acts as a card, and you can use it you can punch in that number and it'll work fine.
Nice.
Also, as this infrastructure gets built out, people will start accepting this stuff more and more.
Yeah.
Right. Like even now, if you're in Spain and you lose all your money and I send you Bitcoin, you'll be okay. It may be a little bit of work. You'll find someone who will trade you. You can trade your Bitcoin for goods and services or money or whatever it is. Like for sure, that already exists. There are Bitcoin ATMs all throughout the industrialized world at this point. There's certainly Bitcoin ATMs in France. You could go in to give some of that Bitcoin to the ATM. They'll give you $400 or 400 euro. They'll kill you on the exchange because they're going to charge you 5% because it's awful. But in that case, that would be a great solution for you, right? And you'd be able to have cash in hand.
Yeah. And Western Union kills you anyway.
That stuff already exists. What'd you say?
Western Union kills you anyways, 5% or more.
Of course they do.
Fees are ridiculous.
Even more. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But so like coming back to the big picture, let's say we've got this 9 trillion that's uninsured, and you've got some, mid-sized small business where they've got 2 million or 5 million that they have in an account somewhere. And, if you said to most of those CEOs of those companies and you were like, okay, you could put your money into USDT or Tether and, it's safe, or you could keep it in Wells Fargo. I think I would imagine at least 9 out of 10 would be like, I feel comfortable with Wells Fargo. It's like a known name. Yeah. It's been around for decades. Like it's one of the biggest banks in the US. So surely it would be backstopped by the government. It wouldn't be allowed to fail. Whereas like, this Luna went out of business. USDT went down to 95 cents. And who knows, it only went down to 95 because there was a problem with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. But maybe there's other exposures to other banks where they have other collateral that if the banking system fails, then all of a sudden these stable coins are the stuff they're backed up by starts to disappear and they go down to 60 cents, 50 cents, who knows? So I don't feel as a possible, you know, as a possible investor or as a possible sort of person who's making decisions. If I was in that position, I wouldn't feel like, oh, I'd feel totally more comfortable with Tether and USDT as compared to one of the big banks.
You know what you're like? You're like I really feel for the Wright brothers because I feel like the Wright brothers were there. They're building their freaking plane, right? And there's Sean standing like 4 feet off to the side, pointing out every little flaw in the plane design and talking about like, even if you get it up, who's going to use it? Like, look how small this plane is. No one's going to fly. It's got to be dangerous. No one's going to take that chance. How expensive would it be anyway? You can't even go very far. You're talking about flying for like 100 feet. Why would anyone do that? The risk is way too much and the price would be too much. It's such a waste of time. What good would it be? That's what I feel like. That's what I hear when I hear you say things like this. I hear you talking about the now rather than the where we're going to be. I see the building blocks for where we're going to be instead. I agree with some of these things you're saying, by the way. These are fair points, but you talk about them as if they are the end of this thing while everything's still being built. You know, yeah, the wall doesn't hold back the water yet because we're still in the middle of building the wall. You're right. But when the wall's finished, it's going to hold back the water, man. Just got to give us time to finish it. It takes a little bit. It's a big thing to build.
Okay.
I think you're being a little unfair in that way. These are your concerns are reasonable and they are things that need to be addressed. I just am not concerned at all about them being addressed. I think as we move more towards these networks and this way of life, that I think they will be. I think the infrastructure is going to be there. They just aren't there yet. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to criticize something that's. I mean, crypto's 14 years old, but really Bitcoin's 14 years old. Ethereum was built like in what? Came out in like 2015 or something. All the other ones came much later than that. Everything's a baby, man. These are they're in their cribs still. And we're still trying to figure out which ones we're using and which ones we aren't. This is all so new. So I just don't know if it's fair to compare it to these legacy systems that have been around for hundreds of years. And by the way, do kind of a bad job in a lot of ways, but sort of point out all the ways that they're not perfect yet. It's true. The Wright brothers biplane right now won't get you as far as a big ship on the water will right now. And it's not as good right now. But the concept of flight, if they can figure this out and get this part right, eventually they're going to be able to build on that where everyone's going to be using it. And it's way better than a ship. And no one would ever consider taking a ship for travel unless it was, to see the sights, unless because it was a deliberate choice to be on a boat, right? But no one would do it for the speed or anything like that. No one does. When I go to Europe, I certainly don't go by sailboat, right? I go by plane every single time. I came back from New York by plane, not by canoe.
Okay, if you could say to me, if I'm that business owner who's got that, let's say $5 million, and you could say, hey, you could take that out of Wells Fargo, where you've only got 250,000 that's insured, and you can put it, you can self-custody it, and it's going to maintain its value. It's going to be, whatever the US dollar is worth, $5 million, it's going to be worth that in 3 years' time. We've digitally found a way to do that for you. And then they said, would you like to do that? I would say, yes, I would, especially in the current environment.
Great.
So I think that the possible solution that it offers sounds compelling. And so if that's one of the ways that Web3 can help people in the future, I think that's probably likely to have a pretty big uptake. I would be curious about the knock-on effects of that, because as you know, that $5 million that I've got invested with Wells Fargo, they're only going to keep whatever 5 or 10% of that, and they're going to invest or loan out the remaining 4 million something. So that's going to create more money in the economy and going to help the economy grow, theoretically. So if everyone starts to self-custody their own money, then what happens? But I'm not. That's sort of second level effects that I don't think we have to consider at this point. But I think that if the Wright brothers were offering to take my $5 million and fly it to New York, and a bunch of little hops and skips, and I said I'm going to use the boat because even though boats sink and they've got their issues, they're much more reliable right now than what you have to offer. then that's probably a smart decision. And it doesn't mean to say that then when the planes advance, that I wouldn't be more than happy to. I mean, today, if you said, yeah, you got to go from Florida to New York with $5 million, you want to take a boat or do you want to jump on a plane? I'd be like,
Right.
of course, I'm going to take a plane, you know?
Great. So just two quick responses to that. Number one is actually people could lend their money on the blockchain too. It's something that's done all the time. So the liquidity in terms of building an economy would be easy to do. It exists as of now. Two, this all started because you were saying, where's the life-changing technology like ChatGPT? So that's what we were addressing. And so then it turned into, well, that isn't happening today. But I just feel like we sort of switched tracks a little bit in terms of the criteria of what we're talking about. It started with, just give me a simple example of a smart contract. And then the critique was, well, that's not life-changing. Then we talk about things that could be life-changing. Like, well, that would be life-changing, but I can't do it right now. It's like, yes. That's why these assets are relatively cheap still, right? These assets are going to be worth a lot more when you can do all those things. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to buy stock in Delta at the beginning of flight rather than now? I think that would be great. I'm super into that. Not everyone has to be, but I want to be rich forever.
Okay, so stepping us away from the FOMO aspect of the being rich.
Yeah.
So you're telling me right now that if I had $5 million that I wanted to put into, let's say, a stable coin, that I could put that 5 million in a stable coin, and that in your opinion, it would be pretty safe. And then I could also enter into all these smart contracts and loan it out and make some interest on it that way, and self-custody the whole thing as opposed to keeping it in a Wells Fargo or something like that.
I'm telling you, not only could you do it, lots of people do it right now with that much money and more, bigger amounts than that. Yes.
What?
Absolutely.
Lots of people are doing that.
I mean, I would have to look, but I think Aave, which is the biggest lending application in the world, in the decentralized finance world anyway, which is where what you do is you put up your assets to be lent out. I think it's got, I'd have to look, but it's certainly got $10 billion in there. I think it's more than that, but again, I know decentralized finance in general, just on Ethereum, has something like $70 billion in it. That's just money interacting with smart contracts in a decentralized way. So yeah, this stuff is real. This stuff is happening now. You may decide that you don't trust Tether or USDC. That's fair. You can wait. You're allowed to wait. That's reasonable even. They've not shown to be, there's questions about them right now, right? Like Tether, there's something we've talked about in the past. Their attestations are what they do as opposed to like a full audit. And it's like, well, seems like it's okay. They've held up for years, but it's not totally clear, which isn't great. USDC, I mean, the problem is that their money's in the bank, which is sort of interesting. Then you're saying, so why shouldn't it's like I should use a bank? But you could self-custody and actually have the money in the bank sort of at the same time. You sort of get the best of both worlds, maybe, or the worst of both worlds, depending how you want to look at it. But like they have very strong auditing. So does Gemini. Gemini actually just sent out a thing on their stablecoin, the GUSD, and how they have a whole page on their website just dedicated to the trust they're trying to build around that, and where, you know, all the audits and all the different ways and all the forms they have to fill out and all the things they do. Yeah, that stuff exists now. So if you don't trust stablecoins yet, that's fine. And you're allowed not to. There's reasons not to. But, you know, if 4 years from now, there's been no more major stablecoin incidents, incidents with major stablecoins is what I mean to say. Any of the big ones, they're all seem completely rock solid. And then you're also going to probably, if that's true, you're going to get signaling that's different than the signaling you're getting now. Meaning like Fidelity might keep a lot of money in USDC. And that's going to be a big sign to people like, oh, this is probably fine, right? Charles Schwab may do the same because there are opportunities in DeFi that do not exist otherwise to make money and to move money around and to do all sorts of things. So yeah, that stuff is available literally right now and has been available.
All right. So I don't trust it because of the attestations. And but I think
that's Tether, but sure.
Okay, that's Tether and not USDC. And yeah.
But sure, that's fair.
So, but I do feel like I see the possibility for how useful it could be. Or I'm starting to see that possibility. And it feels like that in order for it not to be theoretical, I feel like if you want to have an opinion on it, you kind of need to actually have a little bit of it where you're playing around with it and you're actually
Yeah,
in the system. Um, and
I agree.
yeah, so that feels like the next step of taking just a small sum of money so I can actually see what it's like to move things around and what types of things you
Yeah,
can use
you
it
get a
for.
feel for it.
Yeah.
I started looking at GPT stuff, ChatGPT, and got excited about it. Decided I want to play harder in the pool, and you can do it for free. But you can also pay them $20 a month, get a slightly more sophisticated version of it that works that you have sort of priority access to also. So I said, I'll pay him $20 a month. That's $20 a month. I understand, but still, I'm willing to pay a little bit to be able to play in the water fully, so I really get a better sense of this stuff. To me, that is invaluable. I feel like I'm getting ahead of most of the world just by playing in these waters right now. By the way, I looked up Aave. They have $5.7 billion value locked in their ecosystem, just their lending and ecosystem. So I overstated it a little because I think I said 10 trillion or 11 trillion or something, whatever I said. But it's actually 5.7 billion. I didn't say trillion, billion. But still, 5.7 billion, pretty good number. And that's just for that one application. That's not all of decentralized finance. Just one place you go. 5.7 billion. Anyway, it's an exciting time to be alive, man.
It's a crazy time to be alive. It is exciting and chaotic, you know? Yeah.
I think, 3 years from now, we're going to be doing this podcast, and some of these things that, one way or another, some of these things we're talking about right now will have been resolved. Like, one of us will feel like very clearly, you were right or I was right. Not all of them maybe, but a lot of them, it's going to be like, well, yeah, of course. Now we know that, the internet's amazing and everyone wants to use it. And it turns out it's, without the internet, the whole world's different, whatever it might be. Obviously, we don't disagree on that. But there might have been a point in 1993 when we might have disagreed about the internet. 1997, we might have disagreed about the internet the way we're disagreeing right now about crypto and how life-changing the internet would be. When mostly people were using the internet for like looking at very slow loading pictures of Playboy centerfolds and like email, and that was about it. Now you get fast loading pictures of Playboy centerfolds and email. It's an incredible advance.
It is. Yeah. I love my email and my fast loading pictures. Yeah. Okay. So, hey, next time I'd like to talk about regulation. And
cool.
It seems like the SEC is sort of kind of trying to be more firm with some of the things, stopping staking in the US and kind of redefining some of the things as securities and what that means from a regulatory point of view, what it would look like if they stepped up that regulation even more, and how that might impact the future of some of these cryptos.
Great.
Yeah. Good.
Good topic.
Go Wright brothers.